Is the United States at war with Russia?
The U.S. is at war with Russia without directly losing American lives. So it's basically the perfect war for the U.S. right now, for the U.S. security elite, not the U.S. people, but the security elite, because there's no political repercussion. You don't have bodies coming back to Dover Air Base draped in American flags as you did during the Bush administration, which really plunged Bush's approval rating from the close to the 90s after 9/11 to the low 20s in the low point of the Iraq War. And this is incredibly dangerous because what we just saw in Sevastopol in Crimea was a U.S. attack with Ukrainian hands. Now, the only thing that matters here about this attack, where ATACMS missiles led to, I think, 5 deaths, 125 injuries. The video of people being bombed on a beach in Sevastopol is horrifying. I think the most important thing here is, what does Putin think about this? Not because I think Putin is the greatest thinker in the world, although he has a very sober analysis of geopolitics vis-a-vis Russia, but what does he think of it? Because we have to know how he will respond. And before this attack, Putin at the St. Petersburg Economic Conference, in a meeting with the international press, said that the ATACMS system requires US GPS from satellites to operate. Therefore, any ATACMS attack inside Russian territory, the Russian Federation, would be de facto a US attack. And that means that he understands he is on a war footing directly with the United States. And that's, I think, what it took to hit this beach, to kill civilians. I also predicted that once the ATACMS were given and the mission to attack inside the Russian Federation was green lighted, there would be civilian casualties. The Ukrainian record is hitting civilian targets, the Kerch Bridge, Christmas celebrations in Belgorod. And here it is. Everything we were fearing is coming true. And so the U.S. is directly escalating with a nuclear power in Russia, and Putin understands it that way. So I think the greatest threat humanity faces right now is nuclear war. And there's very little discussion of that, very little activism around nuclear war, but that's where we're heading.
Yes. Scott Ritter has, agrees with you, explained that the codes needed to download data from these satellites are protected by top secret security clearances, which the American government's not going to give to Ukrainians. So Americans are definitely involved. And the Russian ambassador to the UN has explained the same thing just 3 days ago. Chris, cut number 10.
Kiev regime, supported by the USA, and carried out a heinous attack against civilians in the Russian city of Sevastopol in Crimea. Ukraine launched 5 US supplied ATACMS missiles armed with cluster munitions. An American Global Hawk UAV was patrolling the airspace over the Crimean Peninsula. There will be measures in response. The Russian Federation will continue to protect its people and its national security until no threat is posed by the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev that was breeded, raised and financed by the West.
Munitions and a regime breeded, financed, and raised by the West. He certainly has his finger on it. Tell me if you disagree. Putin will be restrained and patient in his response.
Well, the U.S. has always counted on Russia to play the adult in the room as they constantly escalated, placed advanced weapon systems on their borders, or the Aegis system in Poland, which can, dual use system, which can reach Moscow. And reality crashed through in February 2022 when Putin initiated his quote unquote special military operation. Everyone in Washington was shocked. Well, they're going to be shocked again, but we can't forget what is being done in order to provoke these kind of counter escalations. The Ukrainian strategy, when they were so infected with hubris and thought they could actually defeat the Russian army, was to actually take Crimea, to purge Crimea of its Russian element through what they call filtration which means concentration camps to purge the political leadership there, mass assassinations, what they were doing in the Donbass. These NAFO trolls who celebrate Ukraine and Zelensky were planning a Crimean beach party this summer. And now we see just a faint version of what it would look like, and it's mass civilian death. And the reason they wanted to do that was to force Russia to the negotiating table and to force Russia to basically give up its strategic, most critical strategic depth. I mean, I think it was Kissinger who said that if Russia loses Crimea, they begin to lose the entire Russian Federation. So that's what this is about. And a close advisor to Vladimir Zelensky, Mikhailo Podolyak, declared after this heinous attack that there are no civilians in Crimea. There are no uninvolved people there. Everyone there is part of this war, and therefore it's legitimate to kill them.
Sounds like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
Sounds like Netanyahu. Sounds like the average Jewish Israeli right now. It also sounds like the average Nazi leader who justified the killing of Poles and Russians in World War II. And so now you can understand, first of all, why the Russian UN ambassador is referring to them as a neo-Nazi regime, but also why over 90% of residents of Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation in a referendum in 2014 after the Kiev regime's Maidan coup, in which they brought into power a oligarchic nationalist regime heavily influenced by neo-Nazis who sees the population of Crimea, who are ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, as basically cockroaches, the same way that Jewish Israelis see Palestinians. Now it's very clear why they did that, and the U.S. has sanctioned Crimea and bans its own citizens from even traveling there because they want to declare that referendum illegitimate. It's obvious now the referendum was legitimate.
It was overwhelming. Here's Foreign Minister Lavrov, who's a little harsher in his words than the UN ambassador was. The U.S. is responsible for this massacre, and they will get an answer. All flight missions for American ATACMS missiles are programmed by American specialists based on their own U.S. satellite intelligence data, just what you said, Max. Therefore, the responsibility for the deliberate missile strike against the civilian population of Sevastopol lies primarily with Washington, which supplied this weapon to Ukraine, as well as with the Kyiv regime, from whose territory this strike was launched. Such actions will not go unanswered. I agree with you that the U.S. was trying to provoke Putin. I don't think they'll succeed.
We won't know. And we may not know.
Right, because revenge is a dish best eaten cold. We won't know when he decides to do whatever he's going to do.
It could occur in the gray zone. I mean, let's say that Russian intelligence laid out a fishing trap for John Podesta in the 2016 election to take down Hillary Clinton. Let's just say that's true. I mean, I know people deny it, and there's good grounds for denying it. Aaron Mate could explain that. Let's just say it's true. It would have been a response to what Hillary Clinton and her government planned to do to Russia, what they said they were going to do, including implementing a no-fly zone over Syria, which would have led to direct combat with Russian forces, and what they had done to support the Kiev regime through its Maidan coup and placing advanced weapon systems directly on Russia's border while calling for Ukraine to join NATO. That was a kind of gray zone retaliation, as it's known in Washington. And so there are many ways Russia can respond. We just don't know what it will be. I think the U.S. is in a very, I mean, as we'll see from the debate tonight, the U.S. political system is in a very unstable state, and it's very vulnerable to even the slightest attack. And of course, the American population and the American security elite, they don't know what it's like to face pressure all around their borders like China, Russia, or Iran do from a hostile military force.